Learning music can sometimes be frustrating. It can feel like you're putting in a ton of effort with very little results to show for it. But at the same time, we all know that persistence is the key to success. So, how do you know when you're being virtuous for persisting and when you're just bashing your head against a brick wall? How do you know whether to give up or stick with it? In this video, I'm going to share the 3 timescales you need to be thinking about anytime you ask this question, and how that helps you to find your answer and the next steps you should take. Stay tuned. In the last video, we tackled the question, is it time to break up with music? We talked about how you need to get specific about what's bugging you and making you feel frustrated or disappointed. That it might be one specific skill or topic, or it might be planning that the work you're doing isn't clearly aligned with the goal you're striving to reach. In both cases, it can be helpful to have guidance on how long should you stick with it. Because being determined is good and can help you get through the hard work required to learn challenging skills. But taken too far, it can lead to losing motivation, getting frustrated, and putting in a lot of effort for negligible results. It's a bit like playing poker. You don't have to play every hand, and sometimes you get into a hand and then realize partway through that you should fold. Folding isn't giving up. It's the smart move to help you win the overall game. So how do you make that decision? As Kenny Rogers would put it, how do you know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em? The first thing to say is, it's okay to fold. Or specifically for music learning, it's okay to adjust course. One of the beautiful things about learning music is that it isn't a strict straight line that you have to follow. Very often when we're stuck on one thing, we can go and spend some time on something else. And when we come back, we find that that thing that was hard is suddenly much easier. So often you can safely put something aside without worrying that you're abandoning it or giving up. You're just taking a pause on that particular thing to help you keep moving forwards overall. This question came up in a Musicality members Q&A one time, and we turned it into a tips discussion inside the site, specifically to help answer the question, how long should I stick with it, when a member has been working on a particular module, say interval recognition, and they feel like they've gotten stuck. What we recommend is to ask yourself that question on 3 different timescales: weeks, months, and years. For something specific, like distinguishing major from minor harmonic third intervals, we tend to recommend a week as the timescale to have in mind. So if you've been doing exactly the same thing for a week and you're not seeing any improvement, it's time to make a change. Typically, there are going to be small adjustments you can make to get you going again. So in the case of intervals, for example, there are tips and tricks and different ways to approach it, different avenues to let you tune your ear into what it needs to hear. In Musical U, we've gathered lots of these ideas into tip discussions, so you always have a source of new things to try. And of course, our team is also there to offer personal advice and guidance. So if you've been at it for a week and you're not making progress, then the first thing to do is just to recognize that. Not to get discouraged, because a week is not that long, and to know that there are things you can do. So then you can find small adjustments you can make, maybe new insights, tips, methods you can use to tackle that same problem in a different way. So try the same thing from a different angle. After you've done that a few times, or after you've run out of tips or tricks, you need to take a step back and think about it in a slightly larger timescale. The medium timescale is months. So if, for example, you've tried a bunch of different methods for cracking those major and minor harmonic thirds, or you've tried a bunch of different strategies for learning the same 1-4-5 chord progressions, and a month has passed, and you're still not feeling like you're really getting it, then it's time to make a change to your plan. With that example of major and minor thirds, we'd probably recommend moving on to a different type of interval, or a different combination of intervals in your training and testing. And that's something you might like to do even after just 10 days or so, because, like I said before, the wonderful thing about musicality training in general is that something you do in one area has a surprising knock-on effect in other areas. That's particularly true with intervals and chords and chord progressions, where you're developing your core sense of relative pitch throughout. Which means that yes, you might be focused on major and minor thirds at the moment, but if you wander off and spend a bit of time on, say, triads or chord progressions, it'll be surprising how much when you return to those major and minor thirds, how your ear has progressed even though you didn't specifically study those in the meantime. It's important to note this is never a cop-out. It's never giving up to move on to something else. If you've been at the same thing for a few weeks, and you've tried a bunch of different approaches, don't be afraid or ashamed to move on to a different area. It's not a failure in any case on your part. It's simply giving your ears and brain a break and feeding them a different area to study before you come back and revisit that thing you were stuck on. Spend a week, then try some different techniques, and if that's still not helping after a few weeks, adjust your plan. Again, at that point, often a member at Musical U will use their progress journal to get guidance from the team to know what to change about their plan. Finally, the largest timescale. We almost never see people get to this stage in Musical U or in general, but it's always at the back of our minds. Should I give up completely? This feels like such an admission of failure, and it feels so emotional to even consider it. But I think we have to be upfront about it and say, this is what we're all always worrying about. We've already talked about this big overall question a bit, but if you are not making progress on the small stuff, and you've tried a few changes, and even on the course of a month or two you feel like you're not making progress, naturally you're going to start to wonder, is there something wrong here? Am I ever going to crack this? There are two things you should know. The first is, definitely don't give up. Everyone is capable of learning musical skills, and we all move at different paces, and we all need different routes. Again, it's not a failure on your part if you're not seeing the progress you wanted to. As long as you've been putting in the work, and you've been staying conscious of how it's going, and asking yourself these kinds of questions about whether it's time to make a change, then you've done your part, and you have to trust that you're moving at your own pace, and you will get there. I can say that confidently because we've seen so many people at Musical U who do feel like they're struggling, or like they've not made any progress for months even, and then finally they find the approach that works, and they do crack it, and they do have the success they were hoping for. The second thing to know is, this is where it's vital to be part of a community. It's easy to bury yourself in a room by yourself, study hard, feel like you're making progress, and then when you're not making progress, you suddenly feel very alone and isolated. That's when it's easy to say, I'm just not up to this, I can't do it, I'm going to give up. This is why we emphasize community so much at Musical U. It's not about social chit-chat. It's because at that moment, when you're worrying, when you're doubting yourself, that's when you need people around you to say, look how far you've come already. Look at the things you've already been able to do. Look at these other people who've struggled with the same kinds of things and then persevered and succeeded. And just to offer that advice and support and guidance, that's what our community is here for at Musical U, and in particular what our team is here for. So, if you can bring yourself to admit that you're having that difficulty, and you can bring yourself to reach out, and even if you don't ask for help, just share where you're at, that's where a community can step in and help you, both in a general way in terms of offering support and guidance, and in a very constructive, specific, practical way by saying, hey, here are 3 other things you could try, or here's something you could adjust about your training plan that's going to really help you move forwards. So, to recap, we've gone from small to medium to big timescale. Small scale is a week or 2. Add in some new tips or techniques, try it a different way. Medium scale, a month or so. If you're still not cracking that one specific thing, it's time to adjust your plan and move on to a different area for a while. In the big picture, the biggest timescale, if you're reaching that point of feeling like you're failing overall and you're not going to get where you're going, that's when you need to reach out to your musical community and just share what's happening. We have all been there. We can relate to you. We know what's going on, and you don't need to feel sheepish about it. Say, look, I'm at breaking point. I feel like giving up. And there is no doubt we'll be able to help you get your mindset back on track and come up with some practical ways you can take steps forward, whatever stage you've reached. If you adopt this mental model for the 3 timescales of music learning and the tips I've given you here for each, then that question of should I stick with it will become a lot easier to answer, and you'll be able to make Kenny Rogers proud. If you want a handy cheat sheet to remind you of this process, it's the perfect thing to print out and keep handy in your music folder or in your practice space. Just hit the link or visit the show notes for this episode at musicalitypodcast.com. Oh hey, one more thing. If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to like it on YouTube, and if you haven't already, please also subscribe to our channel there. That's going to help make sure you get all our latest videos as soon as they come out, and it also helps us reach more people, which means more episodes, better guests, and everybody wins. So please take a second to like this video and hit subscribe.